Isn't life just an endless sequence of things going in one end and coming out the other? Our citizens know that very well because without all of the diligent pumps and engines chugging along, moving ores and liquids around through pipes and conveyors, they'd have to lead a dreary existence without giant logs of aluminium or smoky pools of bitumens to cheer up their lives. So, how about we talk about those a little? Last time in the Soviet Republic of Arab map, we built all those half-hallucing high-tech electric thingamajigs, so this time we're getting back on solid ground. During the International Congress of United Soviet Republics of Maps, the young and sparkling Soviet Republic of Estonia map asked us for advice on what primary materials they should extract and export to give that powerful initial jolt their developing economy needs. The obvious choice is floating on the surface in the form of a big pool of oil in the Baltic Sea, but there's also a respectable deposit of bauxite not too deep into the hinterlands. So which should it be? Oil or bauxite, pipe or conveyor, Coke or Pepsi? Most of what we need to answer these questions we've already talked about in detail during our previous conferences, but this is an excellent excuse for us to finally plunge our probes into conveyors and conveyor lines, which consist of conveyor engines and conveyor belts. One engine is 20 meters long, and there has to be an engine for every 240 meters of belt, which is comfortably the principal expense item on the menu. Eating up a hefty 50 tons of steel, a belt that long costs over 68 grand in 1985, with local labor and imported everything else. The engine is a lot tamer price-wise, costing us a very reasonable almost 9k, which gets us 77,000 rubles per 260-meter section of conveyor line. And if we extrapolate this to how much a kilometer of this conveyor test would cost, we get a solid reference number of 285 big ones. If we compare this to pipes, and feel free to look at our oil discussion for all the pipey details, a kilometer of these, including pumps, costs 13% less, at just under $250,000, while consuming largely the same kinds of resources and similar amounts of electricity to run. This is a tangible double-digit win for the pipes. Conveyors have another purely practical problem. They don't curve, and you have to pop engines at every turn, which on a realistic landscape can increase costs beyond our theoretical estimates. But this pales in comparison to another advantage of pipelines that makes your life infinitely easier. If you want to export your liquid of choice, you can just pump it abroad and not worry about any vehicles. Last time we of course raged and moaned about how foreign pipeline connections are so chunky and cost 100 grand and can only import 60 tons of stuff a day. The good news is that their capacity for exports is unlimited. And if you look at conveyor belts with an eye for exports, you immediately realize that you need some sort of additional infrastructure to move the resources from the conveyor and across the border. So what if we take that 100k the connection building costs and see how far that money can get us in terms of having a functional export arrangement off a conveyor belt? And if that 100k isn't enough, how much money do we need to get something that works? Alright, so let's imagine our conveyor ends at 200 meters from the border. We need an aggregate loader for trucks. Yes, trucks, because it's 1960 and we're a small bean. Also, who builds rails to move stuff 200 meters? We need a small aggregate storage to act as a buffer that mitigates fluctuations in production and logistics, and as a way to potentially expand by adding more load-unload stations. Finally, we need 200 meters of asphalt road, because bauxite is a noble rock and tracks and mud just wouldn't do. That leaves us with 66,000 rubles in our budget. What else can we get? A lot actually, like a bunch of connecting wires, but most importantly, 3 Tatra 138s. 10 tons in the booty and 70 kilometers per hour top speed, 138s are probably the best dumpers you get at the year 1960 start, and their ugly off-pink color indeed has become synonymous with major construction projects in Arab map. So how much can one Tatra export in a day? I've timed the entire cycle, loading the crap in, dumping it at the customs, and traveling from point A to point B, and it takes about 49 seconds or almost a whole day for one of these trucks to move 10 tons of aggregate 200 meters. Someone clearly needs a stern talking to. But life is life, and if there's no hiccups with the traffic or the customs, one truck can export an average of just over 12 tons of aggregate a day, which means that 3 get you almost 37 tons. If we convert that into filthy red bauxite cash, those 3 trucks unload almost 3,000 rubles worth of the ore every day. The fuel the trucks guzzle up slices 1.5% off that number, so our entire big logistics budget pays off in about 37 days. Now, knowing how much bauxite our trusty Tatras can dump at the customs teleports us straight into the realm of how much can a bauxite mine even deliver? A cursory glance at its specs isn't exactly promising. 45 workers, half a ton of ore per day per worker at best. But if you've been to our little aluminium chat, you already know there's no need to send a Jude with a shovel, where this yellow pile of mechanized gorgeousness can do a lot better. In a mine, every excavator level point acts as a worker, so our classic workers and peasants E10011D extracts 16.5 tons of ore every day. This means that in a perfect quality mine, we'd need 3 of these to properly supply the 3 truck export logistics we've built for that 100 grand, and then even dig out a bit of a surplus for us to shockingly buy another Tatra for. Estonia's little problem, though, is that its best bauxite is infuriatingly on a distant island, and the nearest deposit is of relatively poor quality. Though at 75%, 3 excavators should well do the trick. And the cost of all of that? At almost 25 grand a pop, the excavators are the chunkiest expense item here. That's right, the stupid mine itself costs less than a single excavator. All in all, if we discount the usual ancillary expenses like the poop tubes and the wires, and if we unload the daily 37 tons of bauxite, this whole thing, vehicles included, pays off in almost 37 days. Remember what else pays off in 37 days? That's right, our pro-level truck your bauxite arrangement. Although it's the conveyor line itself that takes the cake in terms of costs, with every kilometer of belts and engines paying off once every 3.5 months. If we look at the actual situation in Estonia, we'd need a conveyor line there that is about 3.5 kilometers long, costing a pretty painful 1,200,000 rubles, which we might ideally get back in a year and 3 months of full operations. It's not miraculous by any stretch, but the upside is that expanding on this is very easy. You, sir, are now connected to a whole field of bauxite now, and you can comfortably buy 5 or 6 more trucks for exports and 2 excavator-equipped mines for a total of 300 grand. With the only additional infrastructure necessary being belts to connect the mines to the main conveyor line, costing perhaps another 100,000. That's not a lot of investment for something that will consistently bring you 5 or 6 grand every day, and then of course, the cherry on top. All that 3, 6, 9,000 or more in daily income takes 0 workers. This is massive even if we discount the 3% that you need to spend on the requisite electricity and fuel, even if we decide to use foreign workers for building all of this, which, by the way, increases costs by about 1/4. So, does this all mean that you should really go for bauxite over oil? Well, no. Not if you're looking for workerless, short-term gain at the start of the game when the price of oil is almost double that of raw bauxite. Oil does kinda win there. At that point, you need 3 high but realistic quality pump jacks to match the income from the 37-ton bauxite complex we've discussed so far. Setting bauxite up is about a third more expensive than a comparable pipeline system for oil. And even adding new mines and trucks as we did costs about twice as much as adding pumps and feeder lines that generate the same income. So, oil is king, I guess? The good news for bauxite is that it does go up in price over time. By a lot! A quick look through my previous republics shows that the ruble price of the two materials becomes the same about 8 to 15 years into the game. And the 1985 price reference point I use in all of our videos, raw bauxite is already 2.5 times more expensive than oil, and it spikes to as high as 7 to 1 in later decades. A bit of quality time with a calculator reveals something interesting. If the price of the two resources is the same, building the equivalent initial oil complex is still cheaper than bauxite. But the kind of expansion within the same deposit we've talked about today is already more expensive. Once the price hits 2 to 1, there is no contest. Oil gets progressively worse both for initial construction and for expansion. This tells us that if you want a workerless income stream selling prime materials, you should start setting up your bauxite complex as soon as the prices reach 1 to 1. And at any time before that, just drill for oil. But what should the Soviet Republic of Estonia map do after all? Well, make booze, burn trash, wait for bauxite to get good, and keep oil where it belongs. The refinery. In any case, our conveyor saga is only beginning, as the mighty earth-straddling belts are about to bring vast amounts of materials to make the metal we all need, we all love, and we all hate.